Have you ever felt that it has been far too long since you were truly living, and that instead you have only been trying to sustain yourself from one day to the next? On the surface, everything still looks normal. You work, meet your responsibilities, keep moving forward like everyone else. Yet deep inside, there remains a quiet feeling that your life is becoming heavier and more unfamiliar each day. Many have lived this way so long that they see it as a normal part of adulthood. But through the lens of Carl Jung, this is not a complete way of living. Jung believed most people operate through unconscious survival mechanisms. They live to adapt, to defend themselves, to be accepted, and to avoid the darkness within. And over time, all their psychological energy is consumed merely to survive instead of truly living. In this video, we will move through what survival mode really is and 4 inner shifts that lead you out of it, what has been quietly draining your vitality, and how you begin to feel alive again. So if lately you have felt constantly exhausted even though your life is not falling apart, if you feel disconnected from joy, emotion, and your own inner world, then perhaps this is not simply the pressure of life. Perhaps you have been trapped in survival mode far longer than you realize, and perhaps this is not the moment you are falling apart, but the first moment you begin to see what has been silently draining your peace for years. Before anything can change, you have to know whether you are truly living or merely surviving. Through Jung's perspective, these are 2 different states of consciousness. A person who is truly living may feel exhausted, disappointed, even deeply hurt, yet still sense an inner current connecting them to life itself. A person trapped in survival mode no longer feels the connection. They may function well on the outside, but internally, everything becomes mechanical. Some spend years without realizing it. From the outside, everything looks normal, yet nearly every action is driven by a silent tension. They do not work because it feels meaningful, but because they fear falling behind. They do not rest, only pause long enough to endure the next day. Human beings do not become exhausted simply because they do too much. What truly drains them is that their nervous system has never been allowed to leave its defensive state. Like someone who has lived too long inside a room where the alarm never stops ringing until even when the sound disappears, the body cannot believe it is safe. Jung observed that when people lose connection with their inner life, they live through adaptive reflexes. Sometimes it even looks stable. The person who always has something to do, always occupied with the next plan, but who does not know what would remain of them if all that movement stopped. As Jung wrote, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate." Survival mode is the result of years spent adapting to pressure, wounds, instability, or prolonged unsafety, until tension itself becomes the default state of life. Survival mode also steals your ability to experience joy. The mind stays always several steps ahead until life becomes a list of obstacles to get through rather than a place to be experienced. There is an image that mirrors this perfectly. Like someone who has worn armor for far too long. At first, the armor helped them survive, but after years, the body forgets what lightness feels like, and they may even feel unsafe without it. Survival mode works the same way. Trapped in it too long, you begin to confuse hypervigilance with safety and enduring with living. Perhaps the clearest sign is when you can no longer remember who you were before life turned into an endless chain of pressure. What it felt like to wake up with natural excitement or to sit quietly without feeling restless inside. But sometimes that exhaustion becomes the most important beginning, the moment your inner world no longer has the strength to live the old way. Through Jung's perspective, that is not weakness, but the moment the deepest part within you finally begins to speak, saying, life must be more than merely surviving from one day to the next. The first step out of survival mode is to stop living as the version the world wants you to become. Many lose themselves not through a great tragedy, but because they became too successful at being the right person, fitting their family's expectations, their workplace, the image of someone mature and reliable, until a vague feeling emerges that their life is being run by a version of themselves edited too many times to fit the eyes of others. Through Jung's perspective, this is when the persona begins taking over your psychological life. Jung did not view it as simple falseness. He saw it as a necessary structure that lets human beings survive within society. Just as actors in ancient Greek theater wore masks to perform before the crowd, modern people learn to construct a social face to be accepted. The problem is that a mask worn too long begins to fuse with the skin beneath it. What exhausts you may not be that life is too difficult, but that you must continuously maintain an image that no longer reflects your true inner reality. Some were taught early that their genuine emotions were inconvenient. A boy who cried too much was called weak. A girl who expressed anger was labeled difficult. Over time, people quietly erase the parts of themselves that appear vulnerable until so many adults appear functional yet no longer know what they feel. Beneath that shell, the inner world hardens. Like land covered in concrete for so long, it can no longer absorb water. William was that kind of person. He worked in finance in London, where everything revolved around performance, image, and the ability to endure pressure. For nearly 10 years, he built himself into the image of a calm, capable man, rarely angry, rarely complaining, the colleague who solved problems quickly. But one evening, after leaving work late, William sat inside his car for more than 30 minutes without starting the engine. What froze him was a strange thought. If I stop trying to be this version of myself, will anyone still know who I am? It was not a career crisis. It was the moment a human being realized he had lived too long inside an identity built purely for adaptation. The persona's cost emerges quietly as disconnection from oneself. You walk into a restaurant and take an unusually long time to answer what you would like to eat, because for years you prioritized the desires of others over your own. As Jung wrote, the privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. It names one of humanity's most common tragedies. People exhaust themselves maintaining a version of themselves that society accepted, but that never truly belonged to them. So the first step is not to change your entire life immediately, but to begin seeing the mask you have worn for far too long. The persona also lives inside the sentences you repeat so often that you mistake them for your true self. I'm fine. I don't need anyone. I'm used to it. I just like being busy. Very often, these are not truths, but phrases people use to maintain the image they are afraid to lose. Removing it is the gradual process of reconnecting with the authentic parts of yourself you abandoned, learning to say no without guilt, to rest without inventing reasons. One day, you stop forcing yourself to appear perfect, stop trying to please everyone in the room, and realize you no longer wish to live as a character edited solely to fit the world. That is when you begin stepping out of survival mode, not because life becomes easier, but because for the first time in years, you no longer spend all your energy maintaining a version of yourself that was never truly you. The second step is to stop running from the darkness within yourself. The mask you wear too long also prevents you from looking at the deepest parts within. One of humanity's greatest tragedies is not that people carry too much pain, but that they spend their whole lives avoiding it, covering life with noise and movement until they feel anxious whenever it becomes too quiet, as though stopping would force them to face emotions postponed for years. Through Jung's perspective, this is where the shadow emerges. Jung did not use the shadow merely to describe the evil side of human beings. It contains everything you have learned to reject from conscious awareness. Anger, once considered dangerous. Jealousy that brought shame. vulnerability you were never allowed to express, wounds that were never given a name. Sometimes, it even holds powerful desires for life that you forced yourself to forget in order to become the correct version of who you were supposed to be. Rejected parts do not disappear because you stop looking at them. They continue existing in the unconscious, like a locked basement beneath a house. The surface may appear clean, but if no one opens that underground door for years, whatever is trapped inside decays in darkness and silently affects the entire structure above. As Jung wrote, one does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. But Jung saw transformation in the opposite direction. People mature when they finally find the courage to look at the darkness they have spent their lives avoiding. And the more you deny a part of yourself, the more it searches for another way to appear. Someone who avoids weakness their whole life may become obsessed with controlling everything, because the shadow does not disappear when denied. It merely shifts from dialogue into manipulation. In Norse mythology, there is a similar image. Creatures sealed underground too long do not die. They keep growing in darkness until the day they break their chains and emerge more violently than before. Emotions left unconscious do not vanish. They grow more distorted the longer they are abandoned. Teresa worked in media, the kind of person everyone saw as energetic and positive. Even on vacation, she answered emails near midnight, as though not allowed to disappear from the world's movement. She believed this was diligence, until one therapy session when the therapist asked, "When was the last time you sat still without needing to do anything?" Teresa was silent for a very long time. Then she began to cry, not because the question was difficult, but because she could no longer remember what it felt like to be alone without immediately searching for something to fill the emptiness. In that moment, she understood that what exhausted her most was not work, but years spent running from emotions she never dared to sit with. Many remain trapped, not because they are weak, but because they have spent too many years filling every silence, so the repressed parts cannot begin to speak. The psychiatrist Irvin Yalom once observed that human beings often fear not death itself, but the truths they have never truly lived. Yet the shadow does not contain only pain. It also holds life force that has been sealed away. Creativity you suppressed because you were mocked for it, strength you buried. So when you finally confront it, you rediscover the most alive parts of yourself, forgotten for years. That is why Jung believed the journey into inner darkness is not punishment, but reunion. You do not heal by destroying the darkness within. You heal when you stop treating it as an enemy. If you truly want to begin, notice what triggers unusually strong reactions in you, which you avoid thinking about whenever you are alone too long, and ask yourself, what part of myself did I have to reject to survive until today? So perhaps today. Leave yourself one honest sentence in the comments. What emotion, wound, or hidden part of yourself have you remained silent about for far too long? Sometimes, the moment you become brave enough to call your darkness by its true name is also the moment genuine healing begins and the moment you have truly started living beyond survival mode. The third step is to reclaim the psychological energy that has been draining away for too long. Everything you bury in the unconscious requires energy to keep suppressed, and over time, the inner world becomes exhausted not from pain alone, but from spending too much life force fighting against itself. Modern human beings live inside an invisible economy of energy, where attention, emotion, and psychological vitality are continuously extracted like resources. Every moment spent worrying or stabilizing someone else's emotions quietly pulls libido, the life energy within you, away from the self. And the most frightening part is that many were never taught that the inner world also has limits. Through Jung's perspective, libido was never simply instinctual desire. Jung used it to describe the entire field of psychic energy that powers human inner life: vitality, love, creativity, connection, presence with existence itself. Yet many drain it without recognizing it. This happens especially to empaths because they do not merely understand the emotions of others, they absorb them. Someone entering a room carrying silent tension can make their inner world feel heavier. Society praises this depletion as a beautiful quality. The one who sacrifices themselves is called mature. The one who always listens is called thoughtful. But Jung understood that a human being cannot keep giving endlessly if their libido is never brought back to themselves. As he wrote, "The greatest and most important problems of life are all fundamentally insoluble. They can never be solved, but only outgrown. Energy flows toward wherever attention is most heavily held. If you spend nearly all your inner life worrying about others, saving others, stabilizing others, eventually your libido leaves the center of your own being. That is why many empaths gradually lose their vitality, not because they forgot how to love, but because too much of their life force has been spent sustaining the emotional world around them. Like candles always burning to illuminate others, while never once being protected from the wind themselves. Reclaiming libido does not mean becoming cold-hearted or closing your heart. Jung wanted you to preserve a portion of life energy for your own inner existence instead of directing all of it outward. It begins with small changes that are, for many empaths, extremely difficult. Not rushing to solve every emotion in the room, no longer treating other people's peace as your responsibility, no longer feeling guilty for needing silence, rest, or distance from relationships that drain you. Observe what happens to your mind after each interaction. Some people make your inner world expand. Some leave you carrying an invisible weight. That is when you must ask, am I truly loving? Or am I unconsciously using all of my libido to keep other people from collapsing? Because no one can live fully if all their life energy is constantly flowing outward without ever finding its way back home to the self. If that question lands somewhere in you, leave a like, a quiet signal that you are choosing to bring some of that energy back to yourself. The fourth and deepest step is to stop living as though you must prove you deserve to exist. The deepest layer of exhaustion comes from living too long with the feeling that you must constantly become more than you already are in order to deserve peace. Some people have never truly rested, not because their lives were always busy, but because deep inside lives a feeling hard to name, that they are not yet allowed to stop. Even on days meant for rest, their inner world stays tense, like a string never fully loosened. Through Jung's perspective, this can be a sign that a person has lost the ability to exist naturally. This is the deepest layer of survival mode, no longer about masks, the shadow, or draining energy, but the state in which you unconsciously feel you only have value when you are becoming more than what you already are. It rarely appears as suffering. Society praises it as ambition. The always busy person is called hard-working. The one who never appears weak is called strong. Yet few ask what is happening beneath that drive. As Jung wrote, neurosis is always a substitute for legitimate suffering. Very often, the obsession with moving forward does not come from a genuine desire to live, but from a deeper insecurity. The fear that if you stop, you will no longer feel worthy. One viewer of the channel once shared that he realized this late one evening after finally completing a project he had pursued for nearly 2 years. It should have been a moment of relief, but the first thing that appeared was confusion. He sat in front of his dark computer screen for a long time, not knowing what to do next, because for the first time in years, he no longer knew how to exist without another goal to throw himself into. Many do not truly rest. They pause just long enough to function more efficiently. Beneath it all, a constant feeling that they must keep proving something before they are allowed peace. But Jung understood that a human being cannot live fully if their entire sense of worth depends on what they accomplish. Individuation is not a journey toward becoming more extraordinary than others, but toward learning to exist without constantly justifying that existence. This is a profound shift because for the first time you understand, I can be imperfect and still have value. I can rest without becoming useless. I can fail without that failure making my entire existence meaningless. Like a tree that never questions whether it has earned the right to exist before it blossoms. It does not prove its worth to the forest, it simply grows according to its own nature. So the first step is not forcing yourself to become more positive, nor abandoning ambition, but noticing the moments when you treat yourself like a project to be constantly optimized, instead of a human being who deserves to live. Observe your inner reactions on days when you accomplish nothing remarkable, when you simply exist without creating extra value for the world. What appears? A natural peace or a quiet sense of guilt? The answer reveals far more than you realize about how you perceive your own existence. And perhaps one of the deepest moments of maturity is when you finally understand, I do not need to constantly become more than I already am in order to deserve to live. When you look back on this journey, what exhausts human beings most was never that life itself was too difficult, but that they spent too many years in constant tension just to survive, straining to become good enough, straining not to collapse, straining to keep everything stable. But a soul was never born merely to endure life. It was born to feel, to connect, to be present, and to become itself fully. Perhaps true maturity is not learning to become stronger against the world, but finally ceasing to treat yourself like a battlefield that must be guarded day and night. Because there comes a moment when the deepest healing is no longer about becoming yet another better version of yourself, but about finally allowing yourself to live without remaining trapped in survival mode inside your own existence. If this resonated with you, share it with someone who has also been surviving for too long without realizing it, and subscribe to keep exploring these deeper layers of yourself. Because this journey is not about becoming someone else. It is about finally allowing yourself to exist